Welcome to Affaircare, to our podcast for the week, and this week we're going to be talking about abuse. This particular topic was started when we wrote about 5 tips that you could use to help decide if you should stay or you should go. And at the very end, the very 5th one was about abuse, and how I said that at this point you can't make your abusive spouse stop, but what you can do is change your own self, so work on what you can change, which would be yourself. And there was another person that read and wrote back and forth with me, and I thought it was really a good exchange and whatnot, so it kind of inspired me to use this topic, which is actually one that people use very frequently when they're talking about divorce. And in this instance, I know our site is about affairs and whatnot, but also abuse is something that people frequently use as justification for their infidelity, or people will say that if somebody's unfaithful, that they are being abusive, that kind of thing. So kind of the two are related quite a bit, and I thought it would be a really worthwhile idea to go ahead and investigate this topic. Today we're talking about abuse. And as usual, the first thing I'm going to do is define the term, because what means abuse to one person doesn't necessarily mean abuse to another person, etc. One of the thoughts that I have is, what's the difference between abuse and just, the occasional angry outburst that I can observe in the time even that I've been on this earth, which is, 50-something years, that the word and the term abuse has taken on a lot of different meanings and a lot of things that now they're called abuse, and in the past it wasn't abuse and whatnot. So I did want to start with a definition, because I want to be sure that when we talk about something, we're talking about the same thing and we have an understanding. My definition of abuse is an ongoing pattern of behavior designed to control, manipulate, or subjugate another that usually occurs behind closed doors. And here's why I have that particular definition. A lot of times if somebody is angry once, that's not an ongoing pattern. And somebody might be, as a general rule, over the course of 20 years, they're not an angry person. They don't get upset, they don't really scream and yell, and then they find out something extremely horrible, and that time they lose it, they've lost their mind, and they might scream for an hour. Part of it is their own pain, part of it is their anger, that kind of thing. That would not indicate an instance of abuse. I mean, it would be, in the moment, it's anger, and it's probably out of control anger, but it's not abuse, because abuse has a pattern to it. Then the intent of the pattern, I put in there that to control, manipulate, or subjugate, because sometimes people do things, I think their intent is just that they haven't really matured yet, and then they come to realize that it's abuse, and that's not who they are as a person, and they can learn other ways. Sometimes people are doing it because the way things were with their original family, it was out of control, and now they want to be in control, and they don't realize they're also controlling everyone else. So different things like that, if they have a pattern where they're trying to force other people to do it their way, if they're trying to make people, and manipulate things and events and everything so that it goes their way, or they're trying to subjugate another person, which is to say that they have power over the person rather than being mutually equal spouses, then that would be involved in an abuse situation. And finally, I put the part on there that's the usually occurs behind closed doors, because what I've found, just again by observation, is that often an abusive person is actually very able to control their abuse, and what they do in public is that they keep up appearances. They are able to control their anger, and they do not lash out. But then in private, behind closed doors, that's where the anger is released, or where they put power over. So they are able to control it. They just choose to release it on and usually it's behind closed doors. So usually what you hear the person who's a recipient of abuse say is, from the outside, I'm sure people think we're the perfect couple, but behind closed doors. So that's my definition. when we talk about abuse, obviously the first thing, we are nouthetic counselors, which is biblical counselors. So the first thing we're going to do is, what does the Bible say? I'm going to be very clear about it. The Bible does tell us that marriage relationship is supposed to reflect Christ's relationship with the church. That's a relationship of sacrificial love. So we know that the wife is called to respond to her husband's headship and to respect her husband. And we know that the husband is called to love the wife as Christ loved the church. That is to say, he's supposed to love her by giving and sacrificing of himself. We also can figure from those statements that the marriage is not supposed to be destructive or sinful. There are many passages where the Bible does condemn violence and violent men. And the passage there, that word men there, does not mean males. It means violence in the home. It means humans, the human race. So the Bible condemns violence and violent people. There are many passages in the Bible that speak out about violence. I will list a whole bunch of them on the blog, and then, as I usually do, actually write out the verse as well, because I want you to be able to actually read for yourself where the Bible says that violence is not pleasing to God, and that God does not want us to be violent, and it's disobedience when we are violent. So I will write those out for you. There's a bunch of them. The scriptures also show us that the words that we speak can be a form of violence. And I'll give you one really good example. It's one that tickles me out of Proverbs 10. There's a couple of verses about this. It says, "Blessings are upon the head of the just, but violence covers the mouth of the wicked." So you can see that violence can come out of your mouth. And so to me, even though the Bible never says the words verbal abuse, it doesn't say the word abuse at all, actually. You can tell by the way that God speaks and the way that the authors have written it that, yep, violence can come from your mouth. That this would be the term that we use, in modern times, as verbal abuse. Again, I'll put out a bunch of verses so you can see that the Bible does talk quite a bit, actually, about verbal abuse. As followers of Christ, we are encouraged to consider everything that we say to one another, especially to other Christians, but our words can also be a witness to non-Christians. So to every person we speak with, we can use our words to build them up and to encourage, or we can use our words to tear down and create violence. So verbal abuse is spoken about in the Bible. The next question that kind of comes up is, okay, so now we've kind of established that marriage is supposed to be sacrificial, that it's supposed to reflect the relationship that Christ has with the church. Clearly, that does not include violence in the marriage, and clearly the words are used to hurt people. So we've gotten this far. So how are we supposed to address it? And by we, I mean Christians and the church. If you are not a Christian, obviously the first thing you do would be to become a Christian. That's the part that you really do need. But I'm speaking to people that are listening. I'm assuming that you are a Christian person and you're struggling with possibly abuse in your marriage, possibly thinking, can I leave my marriage over divorce? Maybe the affair is you feel like that's very abusive. So we're struggling with these. First, the church, that is to say, fellow Christians, each individual follower of Christ has a responsibility to offer comfort and help to people who are oppressed. Now, in this instance, people that are violent via words, that would be being oppressed by your own partner. We're supposed to offer assistance to the needy, reassurance and protection. We're supposed to give to the weak and those who are in distress. Again, I can provide, I'm sure you can imagine in your head, there are many verses about the way that we are supposed to react that way. So I take that very seriously, that as a Christian, my job would be to speak to the person who is on the receiving end of the violence, the abuse, and to assist them, to offer comfort and to help them. Secondly, I think the church has a responsibility to hold the abuser accountable. Okay, quick little housekeeping rule here. I'm calling the person who does abuse the abuser. I'm calling the person who is on the receiving end of the abuse the recipient, because it's not always a guy who's the abuser and the lady who's the victim. In real life, there are plenty of instances where a wife will haul off and slap her husband across the face, and guess what? She just committed domestic violence. It's no more right for a wife to do those violent. I'm just saying, the abuser is the person who does the abuse. The recipient is the person who is on the receiving end of the abuse. The second thing that I wanted to discuss is that the church would be responsible to hold the abuser accountable. That is to say, we would be telling the abuser that abuse and violence in your own home is not acceptable. We would admonish the abuser, judge, meaning that is like investigate and being discerning in a wise way. And we would encourage the abuser to change and do the right thing. The steps that we use are found in Matthew 18, where it says if somebody sins against you, here's the steps that you do. You talk to them one-on-one and encourage them to end. Call it what it is, say it's a sin, say it's abuse, and encourage them to end it. If they'll do it, then you've gained a brother. If they won't, then you speak to one or maybe two people. Usually I would recommend something like the pastor at your church or perhaps an elder. And then you and the one or two other people would speak to the abuser. And then if they still harden their heart and they still refuse, then they say, tell it to the church. And by that I usually think they mean to go to the governing body in your church, whether that would be like, your group of elders. I'm assuming there's more than one elder. You never know, right? But, your little governing body. And then those people will then, as a group, hold the abuser accountable. And then if they still harden their heart, it says to consider them as if they're a non-Christian. So we would follow those rules. The church should hold the abuser accountable and teach, explain, whatever you want to call it, to the person that is not acceptable, and encourage them to stop. Third, the manner in which the abuser is to be admonished, that is to say, the way we would approach them, the spirit in which we approach, it's also spelled out for us. None of us is perfect. Our aim is not to condemn the person, but to condemn the actions and try to encourage the recognition of the sin and repentance and change. The reason this is important is that how often have we had the hypocritical Pharisee person who's committing horrible themselves, and they're going to go and judge the abuser? I think it's really important that as Christians that we recognize when we approach them, I'm not approaching you like holier than thou, that kind of an attitude, but more like, look, I'm a fellow sinner. I've done some stuff that was big and grievous and sinful, and I too had to be humble enough to admit I was doing wrong and change. And I am encouraging you to do the same thing. We don't want to have that attitude of being holier than thou. I want to go over a little bit of some examples of types of abuse. I created a page on Affaircare that is called Types of Abuse, and we'll go into extremely greater detail. I'll put the link to that page on the blog and in the description on YouTube and whatnot. So if you're listening on the podcast, please go to the blog at affaircare.com or to the YouTube channel, and you can find the link to the page about the types of abuse. But the ones that I did describe, I picked the most common types of abuse. There are physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, which is like emotional mental abuse, right? Verbal abuse, and financial abuse. And then I made another page. I've called it Examples of Abuse. It's like a list, really. What one person had that occurred to them, and if you took maybe one of these occurrences, you could say, well, that was a misunderstanding. That, yes, that's true, they overreacted on that. But when you add them all up together, you can see that it's a very clear pattern of abuse. And so I wanted to have some example that people could look at and say, wow, yeah, that really is the kind of thing that I'm experiencing. Or get an idea of how it is like a really, it's a consistent pattern that invades all kinds of parts. So, the ultimate question kind of comes down to, is abuse an acceptable reason for a divorce? we believe the Bible does give two acceptable reasons for divorce. The first is the adultery. I think we all pretty much agree on that one, and we're pretty clear on that one, so I'm not going to go there. But the second is abandonment of a Christian by an unbelieving spouse. And this we talk about, that's talked about in 1 Corinthians 7:15. Now, although God does allow divorce in those two cases, adultery and abandonment, he doesn't command it. It is far better in cases of infidelity, if it's two Bible-believing Christians, to reconcile and extend forgiveness and love and demonstrate mercy like God has freely given us. But it does require both of them to do the work, really. Clearly, the disloyal spouse needs to stop the affair and repent of their sins, 180-degree turn and change. And then likewise, the loyal spouse is the one that needs to extend the forgiveness and demonstrate the mercy, both of them then continuing to act in love, each loving each other. So that's the best situation. In abusive situations, the circumstances are usually much different than that. Reconciliation with an abusive partner would be ideal, but it depends on the abuser proving their reliability, which could take years. God is the creator of heaven and earth. He can change an abuser's heart. It's within the realm of conceivability. In order for that to happen, God would move mightily within their heart, and then they could spend years just proving that they are reliable and safe again before it's reasonable to then reconcile. In the meantime, there's like years of time apart because they're just not reliable. So anyway, abuse is not adultery, so we know that reason would not work. But if you initiate separation for safety reasons, and then you go through the steps of Matthew 18 that I just discussed with you to admonish the sinning abuser, and they refuse, and then Matthew 18 tells you to go to the two and then go to the... Eventually the time comes where they still have refused and hardened their heart, and they're still continuing in their sin. They're considered a non-believer. And if they refuse to stop their abuse, then they have abandoned the marriage. That would apply during the time when there's separation. The recipient would be wise to work on their side of, as an example, I went through this my own self, and one of the things that I had to work on with myself was, what was it about me that I was interested in and attracted to someone who treated me that way, the abusive way? And what do I need to do to not be a person who gets codependent and stuff with someone else and can stand as an individual? So I had to work on my own self. And this is where my suggestion came from, the other, in the other blog. If my spouse is an abuser, I can't make up their mind for them to stop being an abuser. They have to decide that. And so since I can't fix them, I'm going to go ahead and work on what bits of me I need to work on, so that if an abuser did try to pull me into an abusive situation again, I would be wise enough and smart enough to say no, to have the courage to say no to situations, and if it's abuse, to say to them, that's abuse and I don't accept that in my life. I will not be abused or take it. So you see what I mean? There's parts of me that I had to make stronger and grow. This is where I encourage the person who's the recipient, work on that stuff while you're apart. And then if God would happen to move in their heart and change them, cool, in a couple of years, watch their actions, and if they're acting consistently safe, and it's been 2 years and they've been very safe, I would say go to somebody who's wise and see if they think that it would be wise to attempt a reconciliation. If, on the other hand, they're pressuring you, they're saying, I've changed, you've got to come back to me, that kind of thing, no, they haven't changed. They just want what they want. So look at the actions and look at some consistency over time. If you don't see the actions have changed, if you don't see consistency over time, then they haven't really changed. They're just trying to snow you. And if they haven't really changed, that means they're continuing in their abuse, which is continuing in sin rather than stopping. These are my thoughts. This is what I believe the Bible tells us to do. I would look forward to your comments, to your opinions, to having a discussion about abuse. Personally, it's one of my bigger pet peeves because I don't think the church really responds to it very well, and I would love to have a discussion. So, all right, well, thank you so much for watching this week's topic, and hope to look forward to seeing you in the month of June, where we're hitting summer. Yay! And I'm hoping to do a little bit of a something nice for you for the month of June. So see you next week. Alrighty, thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.